Thanks for everybody to join us today. I want to just have a special thanks to the staff at the Brooklyn Chamber that really helped us put this event together, and a special thank to my team, and especially Lily Becker that orchestrated this entire event. So please give a round of applause for the entire team. This is the 5th year we're hosting this event. We started very humbly at St. Francis College for a couple of years. We transitioned here 3 years ago with the Brooklyn Chamber and with Dave. And it's been just exciting to see the transformation of Brooklyn around us. There's about 15,000 units being developed within literally walking distance from where we stand right now. And I think it's really exciting to see how the market is maturing around us. Without taking too much time, I would like to introduce, we have a very exciting roster of panelists and speakers today. We are going to kick off the morning with Michael Stoller from the Stoller Report, Elliot Spitzer, and Jeffrey Levine, Titans of Williamsburg. Thank you so much.
This way I have my stress ball here. I can let the two of them be grilled a little bit. Now, Elliot, did you have to get a passport to go to the Kedem Wine Factory in Williamsburg? I mean, did you ever know what Brooklyn was until about 3 years ago?
First of all, it was Schaefer Beer before that. Just so it's clear, that site has sort of a liquor foundation to it. When we did the piles, all we found was vats of liquor. Schaefer Beer and Kedem Wine were there. Still gave us Brownfields credit, so it's all good.
No, but how, I mean, Jeffrey's a Brooklyn-born. Okay.
Right.
You grew up in Manhattan. How do you make that transition?
I'm going to make it worse for you. I grew up in the Bronx.
Oh, boy. I didn't do my research today.
But Michael, just so it's clear, my mom went to Brooklyn College. So, we're...
And your father went to City College where
my
they
dad went to
allowed Levine
CCNY.
to get a degree.
Jeff, you can be quiet for 10 seconds. I know it's possible. But...
You haven't
With
given
this
me the
group,
chance.
it's a very hard.
But more important, I got more votes in Brooklyn than any other borough, so I love this place.
Okay, sir, first, just to prove that I read the New York Times every morning, I want to wish Elliot a happy birthday. It's all about
that was last week.
No, it was the 10th. It's close enough.
Well, yeah.
And then getting back to the Brooklyn City College connection, yes, I went to very proudly to City College of Architecture after going to high school in Brooklyn. And the school that I went to was the School of Architecture, which I'm very proud to say is now named the Bernard Spitzer School of Architecture after a very generous contribution by Elliot's family, so I thank you for that as well.
Thank you. Let me tell you something, and I don't want to take us down a tangent. The city, CCNY, Brooklyn College, the CUNY system are one of the great jewels of this city. And one of the things that I hope people in this audience and many of us are going to be successful enough to give to the universities we attended, it shouldn't just be the major private institutions that are the beneficiaries. The former head of the SUNY system when I was in government made the critical point, we need to be philanthropic towards our public higher educational institutions. That will make them great. And so thank you, Jeff, for the kind words. My dad believed in that CCNY, made his life possible, and so we're proud to be big supporters.
So let's get to the topic at hand. I mean, we were talking about the waterfront, but, when Eric was talking, I was thinking of the waterfront. There's Coney Island. There are other waterfronts around. But we'll start with the Williamsburg waterfront, and then we'll continue on around that marketplace. So, Jeffrey, do you remember when you and I think we were both down at the groundbreaking in 2006 for Northside Piers, and there was nothing going on. Northside Piers was there, and Toll Brothers, L&M were into this situation. You really didn't even have thoughts initially to go on over there. So what has happened over the last, it's 9 years? I mean, somebody 9 years ago, if you could get $30 a foot for rent in Williamsburg, you were lucky, right?
I love you, B. Timing's a little off. We went to Williamsburg post '01, and down the road we entered into a contract, not even subject to rezoning. We entered into a contract to buy the property on the north side of Williamsburg, 5th, 6th, to 7th, and we pursued the ULURP. We became very fortunate in that under the Bloomberg administration, the housing crisis, which still exists today, required that development be done in order to take this vacancy rate up from the 1 or 2% where it's been lingering. So the rezoning was taken over by the city. We then began planning our job. We actually owned the property while Kestenbaum owned the Toll Brothers property, along with my friends Moelis and Furman, Jay Furman, wonderful guy from New York University Hospital and medical school, and unfortunately he's recently passed away. They owned the piece from Kestenbaum. They then sold it to Toll Brothers, And Toll Brothers did get into the ground quick because, frankly, their financing capabilities exceeded mine. But we very quickly followed them to the ground. As you know, we built roughly 1,000 units on the waterfront, 600 of them condominium, 400 of them moderate income rental. And the rest, as to say, is history, because the north side of Williamsburg, no disrespect to the south side, the north side of Williamsburg had all of the amenities, transportation, the retail. And I got to give credit to the city where credit is due, because in the rezoning, they effectively gave us the ability to do away with what was garbage recycling plants on the water. If you'll remember, it was an organization called NAG, Neighbors Against Garbage, that eventually pushed the rezoning. And we ultimately were able to start that because the upland part of the community, which was all these beautiful shops, and if you walk on Bedford, you walk into the cheese shop, you walk into the Cyber Cafe, it was neighborhood amenities of retail that young people had already discovered, and the fact that the city left it and downzoned it kept the nature of the community, which was wonderful for the waterfront. So it works dynamically together.
So what's happening today with you and your newest project, the apartments?
Okay, so as you know, I survived the downturn of the recession, the Great Recession, I'm very proud to say. And as a result of that, we maintained ownership of the waterfront piece of the Edge, where we are already in the ground with a 550-unit, 40-story market rate rental. The affordable component had already been built on site. In addition to that, during the darkest days of the recession, we were able to buy the Toll Brothers, who were not interested in doing a 400 or 500 unit condominium at that time. There was no financing, there was no economy. They walked away from their option. And I was able to negotiate, as I said, with the other partners who still own the property, to buy the property. And during the downturn, we secured the property, we secured a loan, and we built a 509 unit, 40-story building. I'll give a shout out, although David Mondrell is my very good friend. My broker over at M&S, and Andrew Barocas, is over there marketing for us. We finished the job. We've been marketing for 4 or 5 months, and I'm very proud to tell Elliot that we are grossing just over $70 a foot.
Elliot's very happy about this.
I'm calling my bankers right now.
And I think you'll do $70 a foot in a few years, or sooner, if you could move closer to me.
So, Elliot, you know, since he's talking about it, why don't you tell me, the audience, about the project that you're going into
Michael,
right now?
I will in 1 second. I want to begin with almost a more theoretical point, because you talked about the organic nature of urban growth, and I think that is really what we're discussing here. What was the West Village, the East Village, Soho, Tribeca, has become Williamsburg, North Williamsburg, South Williamsburg, Bushwick. It is the organic, changing nature of our communities that sees the dynamism and creates the excitement in urban real estate and urban life. Nothing is static, and as much as we complain, and rightly so, retailers, restaurateurs who feel the pressure of rising rents, it forces them to move to other neighborhoods and recreate those new neighborhoods. And I think that is why, you know, when I walk in Williamsburg, I'm 20 years too old, and all the kids who wanted to be in the East Village or the West Village or Soho 20 years ago are now living in Williamsburg. And that will be for some period of time, and it will create an organic, dynamic neighborhood, and then someplace else will gain that excitement. And that is the creativity of urban life that we want to perpetuate. And to Jeff's point, we need government to do that which is smart, which means smart zoning and transportation. Transportation, I think, is clearly the key to what permits neighborhoods to develop. I'm happy to say the subway service in Williamsburg is getting better. Where we are down where we're going to be building, the J and the M are actually effective. They're good, they're close, they're proximate. Ferry service, all the rest. But what government needs to do is be sensitive to the need for zoning to be smart, for transportation, and we'll get to 421A perhaps in a little bit. Obviously, a tax code, a tax structure that permits building. Putting that aside, I don't know if they have a slide. I think there was supposed to be a slide of there it is, the slide on the right. Those are the 3 towers. We're building 856 units right on the water, a 40-foot esplanade, 20% affordable. 421A, we got our footings in the ground. We have our plans approved.
But Elliot really had the shovel with him today.
I did.
You know,
Let me tell you something.
He was trying to get the shovel in the ground over there.
Michael, like everybody else, and I'll give you the timeline, we signed the contract for the property last August, didn't take possession until February. had some tenants whom we were able to entice to leave a bit early. They did very nicely. So in a matter of 8 or 9 months, we went from contract, plans approved, piles, caps, everything completely done. And I want to give credit for that to Aran Chen at ODA, a spectacular architect, creative, and I think what he's created there is beautiful. I mean, it is curtain wall, the views are amazing, the amenities are going to be absolutely spectacular. Swimming pool is up on the 7th floor overlooking the Manhattan skyline. It is just going to be, Jeff, we're going to give you some good competition. And,
but if you can't wait for Elliott to be finished, I'm finished at 1 North 4th Street. Feel free to come down and rent anytime starting today.
I'm waiting for him to set the rents at a high level, then we'll sneak in. Let me actually say something about everybody saying, are there too many units coming on the waterfront? I think just the opposite. I think what we're seeing is an entire community being developed with good architecture. I'm proud of these buildings. I think they're beautiful. I think people will want to live there because of both the look, the feel, everything else.
Jeff Feelgood, here's Douglaston Development over here.
I think 1 + 1 = 3. Whether it's Domino's, what Jeff is doing, what we're doing, we're creating a continuous corridor of living in Williamsburg that people will want to live. So I want to give a lot of credit to Aran Chen and also to Dave Mundrell, whom Jeff mentioned before at Apartments and Lofts. It's not a building I walk past in Williamsburg. He can't tell me the story, what's happened. Dave has been great. He's educated me an enormous amount. I also want to say this about the city agencies. They understood beginning, end of last fall, that there was an imperative that a lot of people who wanted to build be able to get their footings in the ground, get the plans approved that they needed, and they've done a great job, whether it's HPD, DOB, city planning, DEC. We have worked with all of them, had miniature crises with all of them that inevitably arise over the course of planning a project of this magnitude. I mean, we're talking here over 800,000 buildable square feet. So 3 towers, 2 actual buildings, 3 towers. The number of issues that arise, whether it's zoning or mechanical engineering, environmental, you can only imagine. To get it done properly, and trust me, the agencies were smart, they were cooperative, they were dealing with everybody in this manner. So I want to give a shout out to whether it's Vicky Bean or anybody else in the city who has been smart and been trying to help people build our communities. And so we're excited about this. And Jeff, we're glad to be your neighbors. And by the way, South Williamsburg is going to be a lot cooler than North Williamsburg soon.
But you have to remember, in reality, the first building built on the waterfront was in South Williamsburg. It was
Schaefer Landing. That's right. That's right.
Right. So, we talk about infrastructure. Part of the problem that you have in your section of Williamsburg, not South Williamsburg, okay, is that the L train, even though it's getting a little better, it's impossible to get on these days. So, besides the ferry, what other type of situation do you think should the city do with regard to potential transportation?
Well, as Elliott indicated, transportation is the key to development wherever you are. Commutation to work is critical. And the reality is, Williamsburg, because of the L train, yes, it is crowded, and yes, some people do take the train east in order to get back on the train going west and get a space that's adequate. But we have the ferry right over there at North 6th Street. In addition to which, believe it or not, automobile transportation up there is also incredible. You can be to the bridges or to the Midtown Tunnel literally in minutes on the waterfront. So there are many modes of transportation available.
Now, do you have parking in your buildings?
We have tons of parking. The requirement at the time.
50, I think the number is 50% of the number of units. You need spots, and frankly, I don't think they're all used. Given the predilection
we are actually at the ferry stop, and we are heavily used, and that is a wonderful aspect as well. But the reality is, we are, I like to say, as developers, we're economists and we're investment bankers. We basically take our money to place bets on what's going to be happening in the future, and that makes us essentially students of the economy and slaves to the demographics. I mean, you have to understand demographics. And the beauty of Williamsburg is that the nexus of Generation X and Y, which are those people who are making their housing and shelter decisions today, are choosing Brooklyn and specifically Williamsburg as their destination of choice, not of second choice.
Let me pick up on something you said, because what you're saying, and I don't want to sound too much like somebody at a university, it's an asset allocation decision for developers. The land prices in Manhattan have gone to such a point that the only way to build there is high-end condominiums for which the market may or may not exist at 10,000 a square foot, 5 a square foot, who knows. A lot of us are saying, wait a minute, there are exciting opportunities everywhere else. So those, if you have sold an asset in Manhattan, you take that asset, you buy property. It's not cheap. The land in Brooklyn on the waterfront is hardly cheap, but you can, if you work very hard, make it work as a rental if you have the right 421A incentives. And I want to sort of mention this 421A issue, which obviously is percolating in Albany. I agree with the mayor. 421A for condominiums is not appropriate or necessary in most of the city, if not all the city at this point. If we believe that we still, and we do, have a housing crisis in the city, we need to increase the pipeline of rental housing. Given where the cost of land is, we will not see sufficient rental housing built without a smart 421A plan. I think what the mayor talked about doing is an approximation of that. I don't want to say I agree with every last bit and piece of it, but I think what Vicky Bean and the others came up with is very good, and I think the city and the mayor should be applauded for at least beginning that conversation in a smart way. Otherwise, we won't get units. Now, having said that, and again, I want to spend too much time on this, 421A alone will not solve the housing problem. And I think to the extent that we fixate only on 421A and ignore the other necessary governmental funding.
When you talk 421A, you also have to look at it, like the 50-30-20, as opposed to the.
But it goes deeper than that, because I've been in the affordable housing business for over 30 years. I've been in the market rate business. And the problem with the tax abatement is it's essentially a Band-Aid which has been placed over a disparate tax structure. The fact that the elected officials, you having once been one, are afraid to properly tax the existing constituents that live in their districts, so they overtax the new product to the point that you need the 421A just to make it palatable, be it affordable component or not. The state and the city could address some uniform taxation that doesn't put the full burden of the cost of running our city on the new development projects, be they condo or rental. That would be a step in the right direction.
You're right about that. There are fundamental structural inequities in the tax code. Those aren't likely to be addressed right now. So the question is, does 421A help? Yes, but it's not enough. In other words, I think the government funding streams that go simply to the construction of affordable housing outside the context of having private developers in the context of luxury housing doing it have not been addressed sufficiently.
So here's a question. Both of you are building rentals. How much would the real estate taxes would be on your properties if you didn't have a 421A?
Well, it's very simple. Across the city in general.
No, I'm talking specifically on the Williamsburg.
But specific in general. The reality is that the city assessor looks at rental property, whether it be condo or rental, and assesses the taxation at approximately 28 to 30% of what would be the revenue, the gross revenue as a rental. So if you're at a $60 gross rent, you can expect your taxation to be $19 or $20 a foot, which is an untenable cost of your rent when you consider all the aspects of it.
Well, it's untenable at the current rental level. In other words, unless rents were to jump by almost an equivalent amount, let me state it very simply. Without 421A, it is inconceivable that we would have done our project as a rental. We could have done it as a condominium without 20% inclusionary. We could have done very nicely. My business interest long-term is building rentals. I believe in that. I think we do better. As a public official, I always believed in rentals. I think it's better for the city to have that housing stock available as rentals. And so I was thrilled that we could do it as a rental. It required us to move very quickly to make sure we didn't, as we see today, 421A, I guess, doesn't exist. I presume it will be reenacted retroactively, but today it's not there. 421A was essential to permitting us to do this as a rental.
What about, do you believe a condo in Williamsburg without any tax benefits could sell at a certain price?
Oh, look, they're.
I mean, because you brought up
a certain price, of course.
No, okay.
We do know they sell at a certain price.
No. I mean, we were talking about
which would give you a return on the land at its current cost. Yes, you could probably do very nicely with views the way Jeff is building. We're building. We know there are properties near us that don't have equivalent views that are selling at a price point that still is generating a return, even though there are timing issues. Yes, you can do it, but I think what the city is desperately in need of is rental housing, and especially the 20% inclusionary that we were able to build and happy to build and love building throughout these buildings. I mean, there's going to be inclusionary housing up in our structure, in our 3 buildings, with the most spectacular views of the city skyline. It's great. It's good for the city.
Jeff, one question going back, even though Ofer will kill me since I'm leaving the borough of Brooklyn. When you built in Harlem on 116th Street, through the program. You know,
It was the Anchor program.
The
I
Anchor
did PLP.
program.
I did
The PLP
building
and the
program.
Anchor program. Are there any opportunities today in Brooklyn similar to that type of program before? On the waterfront or anywhere in Brooklyn from what you can see?
Well, major programs like Anchor, like the New Homes program, really don't exist right now. So effectively what you have is HPD, and again, you know, not to polish the apple too much, but Carl Weisbrod, incredible chairman, Vicky Bean, a brilliant academic over at HPD, and Alicia Glenn, having worked on both sides of the fence, both in the private sector at Goldman Sachs, understand the economics of development, and as a deputy under Richard Roberts over at HPD, really understands it. So they get it, but there are no programs right now, and I guess this stalemate of 421A and rent regulation is part of the problem. I'm hopeful, I'm very hopeful, that these very good people that Mayor de Blasio has put in place, and I was optimistic when he did it, but I become distressed by the fact that it's, what, a year and a half into his mayoralty, and nothing has really happened. So I'm optimistic that once we have the ground rules of 421A and regulation, that going forward there will be programs that will be viable.
Okay, let's...
Can I add one other element here, which is NYCHA housing? And I think the mayor and I think Mike Bloomberg before him began this conversation. NYCHA, which we all know has been utterly mismanaged. And, you know, when I was governor, I know the city used to come and say, we need more money. I used to say, what are the first three letters? New York City Housing Authority. And we gave a lot of money, but the city has not done what it needs to do with NYCHA. But the upside here is there is an enormous bank of land that NYCHA has that is there to be used. Now, it may not always be perfectly where we would want to build housing, but if you said, let's over 25 years make it a mandate to rebuild current housing stock that is dilapidated, has outlived its useful tenure, develop a pipeline of money, upzone NYCHA, use the open spaces, build taller structures, let people move into the new structures and create new housing. That is the way to do it.
If you look at NYCHA's situation, you have parking garages in many of these places that there's no need. Even if you built the structure.
There's no need. They're charging $150 a spot for a year. It's
but forget the $150 a spot.
But if you also remember, Mayor Bloomberg tried to promote a program where you would do market rate housing with an affordable component, but it was knocked down by the elected officials. And Mayor de Blasio is re-suggesting that with a higher component of affordability.
The politics of it are hard, but this is where we could make enormous progress with the underlying asset of the land.
We have a lot of land available, and we have mixed use. So here's the question, you know, today it's a different time in lending, you know, because we're talking about Williamsburg waterfront, and part of the component, besides having contractors, you know, a good construction company, good architecture, is you need lenders over there. How are you today seeing, both of you, because I know Capital One was the lead lender on your deal, how are you, since you're out on the marketplace today, seeing the lenders' view of lending on Williamsburg in your development?
They're thrilled. Now, I don't want to say too much. We're in the middle of conversations with a number of major institutions. They visit the site, they walk through Williamsburg, and their view is that this is the future. And they are as happy to lend in Williamsburg and throughout Brooklyn. It's not just Williamsburg because it's the waterfront that happens to be the cool place people know about. They are thrilled about Brooklyn's evolution and see it as at least as wonderful from their perspective as Manhattan or, you know, other parts of the city and the state.
I'll disagree with you a little bit because I have to. But the reality is, yes, the banks love Williamsburg. They love downtown Brooklyn. Obviously, Greenpoint, still part of wonderful Brooklyn.
We're going to get to that in a second.
Okay, where there's great opportunity in communities that really welcome residential housing. But I'm seeing an effort now of people going further into the borough, be it Bushwick or Crowns Heights or Bed-Stuy. Is Ridgewood still part of Brooklyn or Queens already? Queens. Okay, we'll discount that. But people are going out further and further onto the limb of the tree, and frankly, I think that some of those limbs are going to break. I have seen this movie before. While the economy is booming, while interest rates are low, people are moving out to the next best thing,
Jeff,
and then it retracts.
Nothing moves in a straight line. But you look at the larger arc of where things are moving. There will be cycles. Every cycle you go a little farther than you should, then you retrench, but then you go farther again. The banks are cognizant of that. They usually go too far because that's the nature of banks. But the reality is they are now, as you just said, looking at Bushwick, Crown Heights, they are looking at areas where Bed-Stuy, they would not have looked 15 or 20 years ago because the nature of the residential housing stock throughout the city has fundamentally changed. And that's what I said before. The organic nature of the growth of the city is such that kids, Richard Florida's book, The Creative Class, I'm sure everybody has either read it or heard about it, who first, I think, captured this notion of what drives sort of urban growth from an intellectual perspective. The kids who are doing the high-tech, exciting new stuff want to be in Brooklyn. WeWork's opening 600,000 square feet in Dumbo. That tells you that that space will be filled by those sort of individual entrepreneurs who 10 years ago probably would have felt compelled to be in Manhattan. Now they're in Brooklyn.
I can tell you have to be very careful, I think, in where you go to Brooklyn. People have been touting the coming of Red Hook for as long as I can remember. Many developers left money idle in Coney Island for the last 15 years. I believe there are other areas, like Fort Greene, where I'm privileged to say my son Benjamin Levine, who's in the audience today, is running a small condominium project where we believe that the delays in the entitlements we have experienced have only benefited us, unfortunately, because the market there has soared in the last 3 years.
You've probably done better by not having built. There's no question about it. The differentiating factor between or among many of these neighborhoods is transportation.
I'd rather be lucky than smart.
That's always the case. But transportation is the key. And I don't think we want to speak ill of any neighborhood in the city, obviously, but I think if you look at areas which are too far from subways, bus lines, and you say, wait a minute, how do you get to where your job is? If it takes 45 minutes, I think realistically, that's part of the problem Red Hook has.
So here's another question. In certain, and neither one of you have utilized the other big buzzword in financing today, EB-5s. So what's your thoughts about the EB-5 program with regard to financing? Because that's another element that you could use, Elliot, in your deal.
I'll give you, and I probably wouldn't have said this when I was still in government. I understand EB-5 is not only proper, it's legal. I don't like it. I don't like people buying citizenship that way. And there's something in me. Look, I am probably the most pro-immigration reform politician you're ever going to find. You may remember I got whatever kicked out of me when I wanted to permit molasses kicked out of me when I wanted undocumented immigrants to get driver's licenses. I am completely in favor of immigration reform.
But what about
the idea that somebody can just write a check for $500,000 and get a green card when other people have been waiting and begging for it rubs me the wrong way. I would not do EB-5.
What about yourself, Jeffrey?
Well, I haven't personally used EB-5. I do think there is a place for it in difficult-to-finance project in economic zones where it is permitted properly, not where you gerrymander the zones to make it happen.
I mean, right 2 blocks away from here, the Barclays Center was EB-5s. EB-5s have been utilized for many, many projects over there. But in addition, I haven't seen that many EB-5 programs have been spoke about on the waterfront in Williamsburg.
I can't tell you, look, we're not doing it. We're going to use much more traditional financing. I do know that many of the largest developers, I don't want to name it, but it's been out there in the press, have availed themselves of EB-5. And as I said, it's not illegal. It's proper. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing it. So I'm not sure why they did it. I'm not sure if the cost of capital from their perspective was cheaper than other sources. It would have surprised me a bit. The idea that you need to organize.
It's less expensive than giving preferred equity.
It's in essence capital which you can use for equity, which doesn't come with a participation other than an interest ticking clock, which is wonderful if you can have your project aligned to its needs, which has to be essentially permitted, ready to go. So typically by the time you're permitted, ready to go, you should have your financing together. If you don't have that, well, then it steps in very nicely.
So
but again, the regulations there are subject to great change as we speak right now.
Right,
So
September.
it's hard, just like 421A. It's hard to know what the hell to do.
In a similar manner, since I like to be a little controversial and bring up other ideas, everybody is going to Tel Aviv these days, and they're doing Israeli bond financing. Have you thought of that as a different approach for certain of your projects that you could do on the waterfront, your next edge building?
Well, I've been approached, and we all read in the newspapers that major developers are taking advantage of this Israeli bond offer. I personally question the rational logic, just the way I question people paying $1,000 for a piece of dirt a foot to build condominiums. Having said that, the program to me makes no sense. The reality is, if you know, I won't say any names. The price speaks for itself. But having said that, in the Israeli bond financing, effectively what you do is you take good assets, you allocate the cash flow from those good assets into an entity in which you are now a partner, combined with the dollars that you receive from the Israeli investors at a ticking time clock of anywhere from 4 to 6%, depending upon your financial credibility. Personally, I don't believe tying up good assets for the ability to use other money cheaply at the top of a cycle makes a lot of sense. Now, if it were a bottom of a cycle and money were hard to come by, I would be very interested in taking my existing assets and locking them up against some new money by buying property when it was opportune. I do not think it's an opportune time to buy property today.
Well, look, I'm not sure I agree with you about, depends where the property is, to state the obvious. I think there's no question we just sold something because I agree with you. Certain assets are frothy, to say the least. I mean, a little bit of excess in the pricing on the other side. What you said about the capital markets, I think, is most important. Right now, the world is awash in liquidity. And if the world is awash in liquidity, you can go to banks, very standard financing sources, and get very reasonable rates for lengthy terms. And if the project is a good project, you should be extremely happy with the sort of rates they're offering right now without needing to go to these more dynamic or more creative solutions.
So let's get down. You know, prior to coming down here, we were talking about the city storage site, which is a great waterfront site, and we were talking about why don't you let the audience what your thoughts about that and what will happen?
Well, obviously, the city storage sites are my immediate neighbor in the north side. Norman Brodsky has owned it in his partnerships forever. Going back, you know, the north side has had a storied history. As I said initially,
That's why Elliot's on the other side.
The beauty of the north side was initially it was the Brooklyn Eastern District Terminal, and the fact that it was a transportation site with a huge pier saved it from any manufacturing environmental pollution. So it's pretty clean environmentally, which is always a positive. Where the steps that came in after it was used for garbage recycling, it didn't damage the earth. It just was a lousy use of great waterfront property. The rezoning enabled us to do our project, but as part of the rezoning, what was given back to the community were legacy parks for Brooklyn. I had one piece on North 9th Street condemned by the city under the Bloomberg administration. There were two other pieces that a previous partner of mine, Louis Silverman, actually sold to a conservancy for parks from New York State. I think he might have been the governor at the time. So we have three beautiful parks north of me until 9th Street. 9th Street, as you know, are the city storage warehouses, which in fact had a number of employees, and Norman Brodsky and the city could never come to terms on a price for a condemnation so that ultimately those buildings could be reverted to the legacy park that was promised to Brooklyn. Now all of a sudden you have this terrible fire. Now all of a sudden you have a mayor who is promoting affordable housing almost at any expense. And it seems that maybe the politics for the possibility of those sites which are currently zoned in the waterfront rezoning parks land, the possibility for a rezoning to residential is not out of the question in my mind ultimately. There are people I understand who have entered into a contract to the possibility of buying it subject to the zoning, and I wish them luck because, again, I want, as a developer, all of my competitors to be successful because I think I'm more efficient than they are, so I will be even more successful.
Well, look, pick up the last thing. I want my competitors to be successful. I don't know if I'm more or less efficient, just because I think the city's going to win the more we build within the appropriate zoning. In terms of that particular site, I don't have the level of knowledge that Jeff has in terms of the history of it or the current zoning and legal ramifications. I will say that once there is an expectation of parkland, it is hard to pull that expectation back from a community. I think the sort of rational calibration that you're talking about between the objective of more housing and building sufficient parkland is this sort of tough zoning issue that the mayor and the city planning commission are going to have to get out in front of. Carl, we've all been praising him for all the right reasons, will need to figure out, do you take that, some portion of it, and say we can do a portion of it residential or not, or do you just use it as an entire park space that the city, parks and transportation build communities, and so it's a careful balance.
So let's, now
Today the East River Park, tomorrow Central Park.
Okay. So now let's go up to Greenpoint. What's your thoughts about Greenpoint and on the waterfront over there? opportunities?
Well, of course there are opportunities, but I think the issue there is transportation. I think, as we've discussed, when you look at proximity to subways, buses, even people who use bicycles to get into Manhattan or now increasingly work in Brooklyn, it's a slightly more distant commute, which is what you are seeing in both.
But as we were saying, there are ferries.
Well,
ferries are great, and I think will be increasing. They will get usage that increases at some real compounded number, but I don't think that replaces yet good buses or subways.
I actually love Greenpoint. I have great roots in Greenpoint. I have my brother-in-law here, Stephen Chana, who works with me. His father owned a pharmacy on Greenpoint in Manhattan. We actually had that street renamed Charno Way in his memory. His grandfather, Poppy Joe, actually owned what we would call a schmata store, an Army and Navy type store, on Manhattan Avenue going back 60 years ago after the Second World War. So Greenpoint is, again, evolved as a working class ethnic community. Eastern European people lived there so they could commute to their janitorial jobs, their labor jobs in Manhattan. So it always had the roots, much like Williamsburg, which originally was a Jewish ghetto. Williamsburg, as an Eastern European ethnic, if you go there, you still see the signs in Polish. You can still get the best pierogi. So it has the roots to become a wonderful residential community. The problem, as we said, the G train, transportation-wise, is not great. You have to either go south to the L or north to, Queens Center over there. And I believe that it will happen because there's just great entitlements in zoning, and they believe the opportunity in the far north of Greenpoint for somebody like George Klein ultimately to create a shuttle, to get people to better transportation. There are 4 or 5 wonderful sites, one of which belongs to the Palins, which I understand is about to get underway. So I think ultimately Greenpoint will be another wonderful community in Brooklyn.
What about, we were all talking about costs. 421As put $30 in taxes, other things. What about land costs today? In this market, how difficult is it to develop property in Brooklyn and the waterfront?
Well, look, land pricing, I'm not quite as negative as Jeff, who says it's impossible to buy land at a good price. I think it depends on one's time horizon. It depends. There are some acquisitions that I think we all look at and say, well, good luck, and I'm not sure my risk tolerance would take me to that, to willingness to pay that number. Having said that, I have viewed, if real estate assets in New York dip and rise, but the trajectory has been like this. The issue is less the price you pay than your capital structure. People who pay that top dollar but do it with borrowed money, who then get whipsawed by capital markets that turn against them, don't succeed. People who pay even what appears to be top dollar, if they have a capital structure that doesn't have too much debt, or they are whatever, able to hedge it somehow, they will be fine because the assets themselves will, over the long term, perform and perform extremely well. So yes, there are values and prices being paid I would shy away from, and yes, it gets increasingly difficult to do projects as rentals, which is what we talked about a bit before. But if you're picky and you're smart and you don't have too much debt, then you'll do fine.
I personally believe as a developer you have to be disciplined. I like to think that I'm a glorified mathematician, that I have to make the numbers work. I'm an architect by training, and a contractor by background, but the reality is I am like Tinkerbell, I like to say. I only exist.
You're an architect and a mathematician and Tinkerbell all at once.
Absolutely. I only exist if the banks believe in me, much like Tinkerbell only exists if the Peter Pans believe in her. Okay. So having said that...
Michael can be Peter Pan.
Okay. Having said that, the banks only believe in me if I give them the numbers that justify them lending me money. So if I need to create a 6% cash on cost in this interest rate environment to get the capital to support me in doing my projects, then I put the numbers together, and in the final analysis, if I don't achieve that, I can't do the project.
Look, I'm not trying to call it being a mathematician. I think it's arithmetic. I've always said to people, I've never used calculus in my business career. I've never needed to find the space or volume under a curve. If you can add and subtract, you can probably survive as long as you do it properly. You're right. You need to really, as land costs go up, if the revenue isn't going up at an equivalent rate, it's not going to work. If it does, then all's good.
So we spoke about that, but another market, Elliot, you had a 1031 over there, so you utilized some of your profit on 1031. Jeff, you went to investors. How do the investors look at the market today on the waterfront? I mean, the insurance companies, the private equity firms, and so on.
Well, I think you know I've gotten my equity in many cases from the likes of AIG, Northwest Mutual, New York Life, and the insurers and the pension funds are great lenders and partners because they have a long time horizon. They are interested in achieving an annuity, so to speak, so they can pay their claims. And I think if you can show them a viable rental that has this potential for this long-term, slow growth, they're not like the hedge or the private equity funds that want to look at 20 IRRs in order to give you money for a condominium with high risk. They want substantial developers with quality locations that they know are going to perform, and that works very well for me.
Everybody loves the waterfront. You just go stand on the waterfront anywhere along Williamsburg, north, south, go up to Greenpoint, go to Long Island City. People say this is spectacular. Long term, the value is here if you believe that New York City, as I think all of us do believe, is going to remain one of the world capitals for the next 50, 100 years. So that makes it easy. Jeff highlighted the critical issue. It's time horizon. There are some funds that say we have a 5-year exit, and therefore suddenly the constraints are very real and the numbers may not add up for them. Frankly, I wouldn't want them as partners because I don't want somebody as a partner who is itching to get out at a certain point in time. I mean, Jeff's model, I don't want to speak for you, but certainly our model has been build rentals, own it for eternity. It takes a lot to get us to sell anything. And if you believe in that, and our partners believe in that, our lenders believe in that, it all works very well.
What about, Jeff, you went in there, you built condominiums. What are your condos selling for resale today at the Edge?
Close to double what I sold them for. If you go back to the downturn, post the recession, in 9, 10, and 11, the reality was, where we had projected close to $1,000 a foot when we built the job, we achieved something just below that. We were fortunate, again, that we had reasonably good financing, and we were able to survive. Today, those units are selling for ticks as high as $1,800 a foot and as low as 12 or 13, depending on the particular location and aspect of it. I think, generally speaking, people are looking with new product in Williamsburg for condominiums to achieve something in the vicinity of $1,400 or $1,500 a foot, which, again, based upon the ordinary income taxation structure and the cost of land and the cost of construction, which has skyrocketed by probably 25 to 30% in just the last 2 or 3 years, I don't think it makes a lot of sense in a market where you have the best interest rates, the highest values, and a financing market with uncertainty about where these interest rates are going on a day-by-day basis. You don't know if Greece is going to file bankruptcy. You don't know if China is going to fall back. You don't know if there's going to be a strategic event in California, an earthquake. All of these factors make condominiums at these luxury levels on a large scale very frightening to me.
Well, look, we're rental builders, not condo builders, but with that litany and parade of horribles you just gave, the good news is none of them are here in New York. That's why, what I see is that all of those factors, and again, I'm not predicting what's going to happen in the Greece negotiations or the Chinese economy, which is, not going to grow 12% a year, but it's not going to go into recession either. The reality is that a lot of global capital is still flowing into New York because there's a dynamism here and a stability here that people recognize. And so I think that makes it even more appealing to be investing here in the States, and that's in New York in particular, and that's what
when you talk about the Chinese are in Williamsburg, right?
You still have to have the economics of your local residents to be able to afford to buy these condominiums. If you look at the numbers, and we've done some studies on them, the number of people who earn more than $1 million a year who are residents of New York are approximately 25,000. It's an unbelievably small number. Those who earn in excess of $500,000 are just north of 50,000. And one of the most frightening numbers to me is those who earn more than 200,000 are only about $500,000. Now, when I say it sounds frightening, if you do the math, somebody who earns approximately $250,000 a year would have to violate the rule of spending more than a third of their revenue, because we all know that, unfortunately, many New Yorkers are housing challenged. 30% of our people spend 50% of their revenue on housing. And in order to buy a condominium in Brooklyn of approximately 1,000 or 1,100 square feet with taxes and maintenance and an 80% mortgage, you would have to earn more than that $250,000.
But Jeff, the premise was that you not spend more than a third on housing. The reality is in New York, because of those prices,
45%.
People do spend well above that, which is what has helped keep the housing market alive. I'm not saying that's a good thing. It's a problem, but it is a reality. But I would also point out that what is driving, and again, this is in the rental market, a place like Williamsburg that is so desirable, we're seeing rents above rents on the Upper East Side. Now, there's going to be a dynamism here. As rents on the Upper East Side begin to look pretty compelling compared to Williamsburg, Second Avenue subway finally will be opened in 2085. Eventually, people will move back to the Upper East Side. So you see this sort of organic.
We talked about that before. The wonderful thing about Brooklyn and Williamsburg are the demographics for this nexus of X and Y, because you have, as we said, the gastro pubs, the cafes, all of the type of venues and retail amenities and social amenities that these young people want. The Upper East Side, as I said, with its French cuisine, its Italian continental appeals to what was essentially our parents. That will change eventually as it becomes a housing opportunity, as it has.
Boy, you're being so kind to yourself.
You know, he doesn't want to tell his real age. So, you know, we talk about another situation, you know, in a live-work...
I haven't attacked you.
In a live-work situation, you also need retail. How do we look at the retail in the Williamsburg, because we have all these people moving in here. We need these opportunities. We have Bedford Avenue, we have other areas, but how do you look at the retail opportunities?
Look, I look at it not as an investment opportunity. It's not an area that we have invested in. I look at it as an adjunct, a necessary adjunct. Amenity to what we are building. I mean, we're building 856 units. We want to make sure people can buy food. There, if you look at Broadway, which runs right into Kent Avenue where we are, you can see the transformation of Broadway to restaurants. There's an amazing food market that just opened there, an equivalent. It's an urban market. It's as big as a beautiful Whole Foods or anything else. So the amenities are moving in to support the growing number of renters and owners, and that inevitably happens. And again, I'm not seeing it as an opportunity. We'll have about 25, 30,000 square feet of retail in our structures. I view them as amenities for the building.
I think it's a block-to-block battle. If you have a street like Bedford where you have the L train on 7th, the reality is rents are pushing north of $200 and $300 a foot, which seems insane to me. And you go off that beaten path where you don't have the same pedestrian or vehicular traffic, and the numbers come down substantially. So I think when it comes to the retail amenities, you really have to pick your spots. And I believe in an area like the South Side, you know, when I built in West Chelsea at the Ohm, I know it's not Brooklyn, but we were really in the middle of nowhere at that time. The High Line hadn't come up. We're still waiting. You're talking about the 2nd Avenue subway. Any day now, we're going to see the 7 train, which was supposed to open 18 months ago.
No, the 7 line is going to open in the next couple months. And, you know, again, not to leave Brooklyn, we have a block in the Hudson Yards 50 feet from where the 7 line terminus will be. That will transform the Boulevard Park, the High Line. Those are the sorts of infrastructure investments that transform communities. The High Line, I think, will go down as one of the great case studies of what urban investment can do to transform an entire piece of a city. It is absolutely spectacular, and the people deserve real credit for that.
But what I started to say is, when we were renting up the retail there, we could have achieved a far higher rent per square foot going to the galleries, which were stretching down from the south. But the reality is, the 400-plus residents that had moving into the Ohm didn't need to be a piece of art.
You need
they needed toilet paper, toothpaste. So we went with a gourmet grocer, which was a wonderful amenity for the building. And frankly, that's how I've always looked at retail in my residential developments. It's there to serve the residential development because that's where the money is.
Speaking of the retail, you sold your retail in the Williamsburg. How do you feel about it?
Well, when somebody makes you an offer that you deem too good to refuse, I think you have no choice. I liked it. I think it needed time to mature, but I like to make my capital work. And in that particular case, I thought it was a good opportunity to take the money and move on to the next.
So now, you know, you bring up the subject of opportunities. And we're only talking about only Brooklyn, because Ofer will kill me otherwise. Where are the other opportunities in Brooklyn today? I mean, you mentioned that Ben's working on a small condo development in Fort Greene. Where do you see the opportunities? You know, we always joke about Coney Island. You know, it is the waterfront. It's beautiful over there. But as Elliot alluded before, 45 minutes on the train, 50 minutes, and then you just get off, and then you have another 30 minutes. So where do you look as a potential opportunity?
We have looked. We have not bitten because we are, I don't mind saying, pretty much consumed by what we're doing in Williamsburg and Hudson Yards and in Washington, D.C. But at a number of sites, and friends of mine have looked in Bushwick, Fort Greene, and it is sort of the move outward away from, as Jeff alluded, the increasing price point in Williamsburg. And so people are beginning to move out just a little bit, and the opportunities there, I think, are spectacular. The renovations you're seeing of old warehouse buildings into either gallery space, which may be the intermediate stop before they go into straight commercial or rental structures, it is absorbing a lot of capital and speaks very well for the viability of the borough.
I think the opportunities are in time, not in space, but in time. I am not buying at today's market prices because I find it very difficult to make the economics for rentals work, and I believe that the for sale market is also very speculative, especially, as I said, in consideration of the ordinary tax structure. So I believe that there are some developers out there who have been fortunate or unfortunate enough to get money from investors and who are placing bets where they have an upside but no downside, and some of these deals will be coming back to earth, and I intend for all of you brokers in the audience to remember what I'm saying here today and call me when you have distressed real estate so I can buy at the appropriate time, because much of the money in real estate is made by timing.
Do you want to...
You know, look, Jeff is right. If you time things, timing is, it goes to what you said earlier, better to be lucky than smart. It's very hard to time markets. It's very hard to know where there's a bottom, very hard to know where there's a top. I think it's reasonably easy now in certain markets to see that there's froth. I mean, I've said to many people, the retail market in Manhattan on the major thoroughfares, the pricing is simply hard to understand. And we sold an asset to a certain extent because of that. Having said that, there are extremely smart people who have very long time horizons who are buying it. So I'm always hesitant to think that we're doing things because we can time the markets. It is a long-term view of what value will be over a 30, 40-year time horizon that I believe in.
I agree with you, but if anybody knows Jerry Gottesman, when he sells, it's the top, and that has happened.
That's right. So here's a question. We've spoken about residential. We've spoken about retail. We've spoken about other aspects. One aspect which has become very hot in Brooklyn and in Williamsburg is the hospitality. How do you look at the hotel business in Williamsburg? Because there are a substantial number of new hotels under various stages of development, plus there is a office building being developed in Williamsburg. How do you look at those two different markets?
I don't know enough about the hotel business in Williamsburg, other than I would just observe this. With respect to both the commercial and the hotel piece of it, it speaks to the reality that Williamsburg and Brooklyn are becoming fully enclosed urban environments, no longer just commuter locations into Manhattan. In other words, people want to work here. They do work here. It goes to WeWork's building 600,000 square feet in Dumbo. It goes to Dumbo being leased up with major tech companies. In other words, what is happening is that Brooklyn is becoming a full economic environment in itself. So you need hotels and the restaurants as well as the commercial spaces.
So as you know, Michael, I have been in the hotel development business. I had the good fortune to partner with the Achenbaum family in the Gansevoort Park, and I actually built the Gansevoort Meatpacking. We're doing another project, actually, as we speak now in London, in Shoreditch. And Shoreditch is this community similar, frankly, to, if any of you know London, to Williamsburg. It's where the young generation is finding its homes. It's where the tech industry is finding its base. It's got the same retail amenities that appeal to these young people that Williamsburg does. So obviously, the Williamsburg market for hotels is strong, whether it's the Wythe, which was done by the Willentis family, or the new hotel currently being done in that vicinity. I think there's a strong market. There have not been a lot of rooms, frankly, built yet, so there is more room. But again, a hotel is a highly sensitive economic business. If you know anything about it, the food and beverage, which is very strong in Williamsburg, is a very positive attribute. So I do think there will be more hotel development in Brooklyn, and I would, if I had the location, would do one as well.
Okay. Any questions from the audience? Yes.
We love water. We just don't love water in our basements.
Or our first floors.
Or our first floors. Well, the reality is that the design mandates these days require you to be, I forget, 3 or 4 feet above the floodplain. The only thing you can put below is garages, on the theory that, okay, if cars get damaged, that's not irrevocable. And so it increases cost structure. You have to design for it, and wisely so. I think anybody who doesn't, again, we're doing rentals. It'd probably be even more difficult as a condominium, but they're quite particular and stringent design mandates, and that's as it should be.
You know, again, it's better to be lucky than smart, as I've alluded to all the time. You know, in Williamsburg, we were a little bit smart and a lot lucky. At the Edge location, because much of it was natural land for many years, we never lost electricity at our particular site. We never had water come into the building because we were cognizant, bless you, we were cognizant of the fact, again, we were cognizant of the fact that we were close to the water. Kent Street is actually at an elevation of about 15 feet above the East River. When you go down to the bulkhead, it's almost 6. We very intelligently built our building at a mean height curb grade that was more common to Kent, which we were able to do, than the waterfront park, which separated us from the river. So you can design intelligently, you can build effectively to keep the water out of your building, but you have to be very cognizant of it, which we were. I mean, in our newest building, after the hurricane, even though we were fortunate and we did not take water at all into our buildings, we took our electric service as well as our mechanical operations and put them out of the basement. So effectively, we only have parking in the lowest levels, and put them on the legs or tails of the building where, in fact, they were protected from any weather event.
I mean, Jeff mentioned that Kent is actually 15 feet above water level, which you don't really are not aware of if you just kind of walk along Kent, but it makes it a bit easier to design it and take advantage of this.
Does anybody want to rent an apartment?
There's a question up there.
I won't say anything that's terribly informative. You have properly and perfectly captured a problem. Again, it goes to the organic nature of neighborhoods. What began as a neighborhood that was, you know, hipsters or whatever the word is, 20-year-olds, is now increasingly a neighborhood that will have families, kids require schools. The city will have to accommodate that. The city doesn't always move, and I don't say this to be critical of the city. It is a deliberative process. It takes time. One of the issues we asked ourselves in designing the apartment makeup of our property on Kent Avenue is studios, 1s, 2s, how many families increasingly will be living here, and as more families live here, obviously the need for schools increases again, and it becomes a loop. So do we build just studios believing it's going to maintain its current nature and composition, or more 1s and 2s for families moving in which case you presume the city will build schools. Hopefully the city will add schools. It needs to do so for the good of the neighborhood.
Well, the evolution has already begun. If you take a look at a number of the developments in the north side, there are pre-Ks and nurseries because many of the children there are rather young and are not yet in the public school process. And I think the combination of our city's school system and the charter system will respond to the needs of the community as it already has on the pre-K level, and it will evolve to the satisfaction of those people who live there.
Thank you so much.